I've been thinking about this hard for the last year, really, because obviously our movement is in trouble. And I'm going to try out some ideas on you. And this is basically going to be a hopeful talk, sort of a call to arms, really. But I'm going to have to start by looking at just how bleak things are at the moment in the climate movement, because we can't go anywhere until we admit that to ourselves. And we're cornered at the moment. And that's the starting place. And big carbon is triumphant. I first noticed this absolutely clearly in the COP in Glasgow in 21. But they just didn't have to worry about us. They were openly contemptuous. And that has solidified at every COP since. And it has become the kind of mainstream agreement among the people who run the world that really we're not going to be able to stop climate change. Really, we're going to have to adapt to it. And that confidence in big carbon is reinforced by the growing strength of the racist far right globally. Trump is especially important, but it's a global phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that is dead set against doing anything about climate change. And and for many of us, it breaks our hearts because the working class, which was always the core of of, of the movement for a better world, the far right is stronger in the working class than we are. This leads to all of these things together have led to a demoralization in the climate movement. And there are a lot of signs of that. In some ways, the most important one is the change in the scientists. For 30 years, the scientists were the most hardcore part of the coalition that we are running as a climate change, over climate change. Whenever the NGOs and all the policy people and so on and the politicians started to talk about compromise and steady, gradual change and so on, the physicists and the climate scientists would insist, no, none of that is going to work. We have to stop emissions, and to do that, we have to stop burning fossil fuels. Even when their politics weren't left wing at all, their understanding of physics was strong enough that they were very strong in this. In the last few years, the dominant position among climate scientists has switched to what's called the overshoot theory, which is a theory that we are not going to be, nobody thinks we're going to stay at 1.5 degrees actually, but probably we're not going to stay at 2 degrees, but we're going to overshoot it. There will be more and more emissions, and it will get hotter and hotter, and then having overshot, we will come back. There will be at some point in the future a great deal of money expended on taking carbon dioxide out of the air, and this is now the scientific orthodoxy. Two enormous weaknesses in it. The first one is if we're not going to if we're not going to do it now, we're not going to do it. But the other one is that there are, as we don't know where the feedback loops will come in. There are several of them that are happening, but we don't know how fast they're happening. But they accelerate the process. And we can't simply overshoot and then come back. I can explain that in more detail if you want to in the discussion. But once we've got there, it will be a great deal more difficult to come back than it was to get there. And also, overshoot is it's a piece of mystification. It's a piece of bullshit. It's covering up that they're accepting that the governments are not intending to do anything now. And that's not only widely accepted among scientists now, it's built into every single one of the models that they're using all over the world to predict what's going to happen with climate change, with climate policy, and so on. It's built into all the models now. in ways that are not obvious to start with. So that's our strongest bastion in a sense has fallen. But given the feeling of demoralization, the other thing that's happened with the NGOs, but also with the sort of anarchist direct action side of the climate movement and with the socialist Marxist side and with the trade union side, has been a twofold process. One is withdrawal, and you go off and do something else that absolutely has to be done. Greta Thunberg is a good example, and good on her. But that's been one response. The other response is you go on about something that is climate adjacent, but is not actually about reducing emissions from fossil fuel, which is the overwhelming thing we need to do. So you become very interested in trees, and you say that forests are the main issue. They're an issue, but they're not the main issue. You become very interested in diet or meat, which again isn't going to stop fossil fuel emissions. You campaign about plastics. You point to all the things that are going wrong with all the planetary boundaries. None of these campaigns are in themselves a bad thing. They're not in themselves a bad thing, but they're not climate change. They're a withdrawal from actually trying to stop climate change. On the left, you tend to get campaigns for degrowth, which again isn't about climate change. I mean, you can think what you want about degrowth, but it is not going to stop emissions by 90%. It simply is not. Or you get explanations about the metabolic rift. Again, these are all things that people are doing because they don't know what to do about the central issue facing us. That's the state of our movement, and no one person or group of people should be criticized for it at all, because that's the situation we're in. But we have to look at some other aspects of the situation. The first one is that things are much worse than we thought they were going to be in the real physical world. And they're worse because the effects in the physical world of the rise in temperature we've had is much greater than we thought it would be. And in terms of floods, in terms of droughts, in terms of fires, in all the terms we could have, that the effects are much worse than we thought they would be for a given rise in temperature. Also, COVID taught us what I hadn't grasped before, and I think many of us hadn't grasped, the very important economic effects that we're going to get from climate change. The way that the droughts will become the disappearance of crops in some area, and then the way that that works through a whole global supply chain of food. And also, there has been a very there's been Gaza. And the effect of Gaza, and I think the intended effect of the Gaza genocide, was to raise the bar for what could be done to any movement of resistance by anybody anywhere in the world. It wasn't, things like Gaza have been done before, but they've never been shared with the whole world, with people filming their sister being killed, and it's in a phone in my pocket 6 hours later. That's new. The complete distribution of a genocide. That was, I don't think Biden or Netanyahu set out to do that, but once they saw what it did, they liked it. Or that's probably too mean, but they liked the consequences of it. The thing about Gaza is that it was supported by Trump, but by Biden, by Netanyahu, by also the rest of the Israeli political parties, by the Emirates, by Saudi Arabia. In effect, by Russia and China didn't stop it. I mean, all the powers of the world wanted an increase in what could be done to people. And specifically, because the Palestinians are refugees, because in order to survive, many of them had to have relief aid of some kind. Gaza made possible a much more brutal approach to refugees. The fact that 2.5 million refugees have been forced back into Afghanistan in the last year, for instance, but it's much more general than that. The cutting of relief aid from the United States and from Britain. These are very bad signs of what they will do to people. The other thing, though, and this is very important, is that everybody knows now. The people who say they don't know, the climate deniers, they know. Everybody knows. And everybody knows where we're going, really. Even when they say they don't. Hi, Sinan. Um, and and large majorities in almost all countries want something done. The fact that the mainstream and everybody else is saying nothing can be done, the support for doing something is also very widespread. So what do we do? Well, I think we have to look. I've given 20 years of my life to the climate movement. I think we have to look at what we have to do differently, at the weaknesses that we've had across all of us as a movement. The first thing we have to say is no more waiting for the market. We've waited since Rio for the market, 30 odd years, for the market to solve this problem. And the market has not solved this problem. Emissions continue to rise. It's not that we haven't moved fast enough and we haven't got them down fast enough. It's that emissions globally continue to rise. Again, no more promises. We begged them for promises, and they gave us promises, and they gave us goals, and they gave us targets, and they gave us this by 2040, and this by 2035, and this by 2050, and those all turned out to be lies. No more promises. No more campaigning for that. And also, I think, no more thinking that lobbying is going to do it. Most people in the climate movement, most people, most of the time, believed that the people around the world were at least reasonable enough that if we showed them that, gave them enough arguments and showed them that enough people really cared, they would do something. And it hasn't worked. The lobbying hasn't worked. And we have to say that because the market hasn't worked, this is going to take government action. A large slice of the movement already believed that before 2020, but now I think it's obvious to a much larger group of people. It's going to take government action. But I'd go further than that. I think we have to say, to make that action happen, we have to have power. We cannot do it without being a government in power. If we have a mass movement that persuades persuades a government to promise that they will do it, they will get into power and they will just nickel and dime it away. They will lose it in committees. They will have enormous what they say are enormous projects that don't actually stop it. We need to cut almost all fossil fuels, and we need to cut them quickly. And we need to replace fossil fuels all over the world with enough renewable energy to do everything that fossil fuels do now, not just electricity. And unless the people pressing for this to happen are also the people who are the government, who are an elected government, it will not happen. It will not happen simply with an elected government either. We will need a mass movement that moves as the first government we elect to do this loses their nerve, loses their bottle, sells out, whatever they do. We need a mass movement that will then force them to do it and that will then replace them. We may have to come back more than once on this one. There's a lot of problems with saying to the climate movement we need power. One is it's outside the rules by which NGOs are funded. NGOs can't and won't do it. It's also a lot of people who are anarchists or semi anarchists have an enormous aversion to saying that the government has to do it for the very good reason look at the fucking governments of the world. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at China. Look at it doesn't matter. Look everywhere. That's an enormously powerful argument, but it's unfortunately a powerful argument for our powerlessness. We have to break through this contradiction that we have faced for a very long time. Also, and here I am taking something from the old idea of climate jobs, we need to have a program of work that starts immediately. A program of government work that starts immediately. So it's not a promise that something will have happened by 2035. It's a problem that something will be completely underway in 12 months' time. That all the number of people who are going to be needed to do all of this will be there. That the government will begin all of the necessary jobs that have to be done to make a renewable economy. And also as we develop the renewable economy, we close down all of the fossil fuels so that in the end, the selling of fossil fuels becomes a crime in the way that the selling of anthrax is now a crime. That means, though, a specific policy for the movement and a specific policy for political parties, maybe one, maybe more than one, maybe existing political parties, maybe new ones, but a specific thing so that instead of fighting for awareness, instead of fighting for a promise, we're fighting for an actual detailed program of action. Also, it has to be what's been called a Green New Deal. It has to be, if it's political and for power, it cannot just be about climate change. It has to be about the other issues that people care deeply about. A party that is only a green party or only a climate party or whatever is never going to work. Quite rightly, if we want to be the government, people need to know what else it is we want to do. The absolute central thing to any policy, you can name lots of goals, but the central thing is we tax the rich. Because if you don't tax the rich, we can't do all the climate work we need to do. We can't fix health. We can't fix care. We can't fix education. We cannot fix any of the other things that people care about. So it has to be, above all, a problem to tax the rich and share the wealth so that we can solve all the problems we have. That's possible. That's doable. And it's doable very fast. If we can persuade a movement to do it. Now, there's one more thing that's important, and that's the political situation that we're living in at the moment. The political situation we're in is, as every one of us knows, very frightening, enormously unstable, moving very fast. It's difficult to see the future, but one thing I'm completely sure about it. Trump is going to go. Trump is going to be finished. Last year, I spent a lot more time writing about Epstein than I have about climate. And what I've learned from that is Epstein is going to end Trump. That stuff is going to come out. It's going to be extremely dangerous for him. It's going to be very destabilizing for the whole political world in the United States and to some extent more generally. In the United States, it's very important that the coalition that has protected Epstein runs from Steve Bannon through Bill Gates and Trump to Biden and Clinton, who is very much involved, all the way to Noam Chomsky. It's a it's a coalition of the willing. It's a coalition, not the key thing. It's not a coalition of pedophiles. It's a coalition of people who cover up sexual abuse of all kinds. And when that goes, the political effect is going to be enormously destabilizing. After Trump, the whirlwind. You can see the enormous destabilization in global politics in the Middle East at the moment. I'm not going to say the United States is going to lose, because I think the United States is going to lose in the Middle East, and I think Israel is going to lose, but it's also entirely possible at the same time Iran will lose and Lebanon will lose and all the people under the bombs will lose. It may be a general destruction. But what there will be, what is coming up, is by the time we get in America to 2008 or in the UK to 2009, there is going to be an enormous political space. We may or may not be able to get a New Deal to get politicians pledged to, at least, a New Deal to save the planet and tax the rich. But we will certainly be going into a period when it will be possible to make that the thing for which the climate movement is fighting. This means it will be difficult for the climate movement to do this, because it also means that some of our best and most radical fighters have been devoted to the barricades, the movement of the barricades. And the movement of the barricades from the First Nations people in Canada and the Lakota Indians and so on, Native people in the United States, all the way through to the German movement and so on, has been enormously important. But we cannot simply be against. If we are simply against, we might come back to it. But what will happen to us is what has happened to the German Green Party and to the German climate movement. We will, unless we show people that we can also fill the spaces, that we can also give people what they need to live, we're not going to get there. So that's, I think, in outline, where I think we need to go. And I think it's possible. And I'd like us to start arguing about it, talking about it. I'd like to know what you think, because I'm going to be trying to think about this some more. And I think we could do it. We could, if we do this right, there's a possibility of saving each other and the planet. I'll stop there.